Chests in Terraria come in many different varieties, serving as a means for storing your items and providing a way to obtain powerful items at various points in a playthrough. With this in mind, what I want to do today is see if I can beat Terraria without using any chests. This means that I won't be able to loot them or use them for storage. I'm also not allowing the storage of items in other inventories such as a piggy bank, with the one exception that I will be able to put money away inside of a bank. This means that apart from coins, I will have to store all of my items in my inventory for the entire playthrough. Not having access to these features should provide me with an interesting challenge to overcome. So, let's get started. After loading into the world, I immediately began the construction of a basic house, hoping to get the merchant as quickly as possible. Because I wouldn't be able to store any items, once my inventory filled up, I'd have to start getting rid of things. So instead of trashing, I wanted to have somewhere that I could sell my items. Once my house was ready, I began exploring a nearby cave, but unlike most playthroughs, I was not interested in gold chests because I couldn't use them. Instead, I wanted to collect up a bunch of ore that I could use to craft into equipment that would help me explore the world easier. Because I didn't have access to the powerful treasure found in chests, I wanted to do some biome fishing for crates that could serve as an alternative method for obtaining many of these items. After I had collected up enough ore to craft some basic upgrades, I began to explore my world in search of the jungle where I would fish first. Once I found my jungle, I spent a good chunk of time fishing until I had collected up a few biome crates. The loot from this first fishing expedition rewarded me with some potions and ores, as well as a double jump and a new fishing pole. So now that I had some better gear, I wanted to fish in the snow biome, hoping that I could get a good weapon from the crates found there. And luckily for me, after another long fishing session, I managed to get a bunch of new useful items, including a snowball cannon as well as flurry boots. Satisfied with the items that I had gotten from fishing, I decided that my next move would be fighting the Eye of Cthulhu. After crafting a summon for the boss, I placed a bed to help pass the time until the fight. Once night had arrived, I exited my house and used the suspicious eye, starting the battle. With the eye's arrival, I began to use a combination of my snowball cannon and enchanted sword to deal damage to the boss, as well as picking off the servants that the eye was spawning. Enraged by my continuous barrage of snowballs, the eye let out a roar as he transmogrified into his second form. Using my flurry boots, I continued to outrun the now much faster boss as he began to dash after me. With his health dwindling, the Eye of Cthulhu began darting wildly in a seemingly random pattern, desperately trying to end my assault. But I wasn't going to give up. As the final snowball pierced through Cthulhu, his body exploded, leaving behind the valuable loot. With my first major foe down, the next objective was taking on the boss of the corruption, so I began to prepare an arena above the worm's subterranean lair. Once it was complete, I traveled down into the corrupted tunnels and smashed the final shadow orb, awakening the Eater of Worlds. With the worm pursuing close behind, I quickly ascended out of the tunnel and back to my arena. Now, with more room to dodge, I began to damage the boss using a combination of my best weapons. The fight started out shaky as I took multiple hits from the world's vile projectiles, but once I gained my footing, I began to deal significant damage to the boss, mainly thanks to my Vile Thorn. As the battle raged on, the worm continued to lose more and more of its segments, and before long, he was down to the final few. Using my snowball cannon, I quickly finished off the final chunks of the worm and collected my prize. Soon after defeating the worm, I spotted the site of a meteorite impact, so I began the excavation of the valuable ore and forged it into a new set of armor. With this upgrade now acquired, I felt ready to fight the goblin army, but I didn't have the means to summon them. So, while I waited for an army to arrive naturally, I decided to construct an arena at the dungeon that I would be able to use for the Skeletontron fight later in the playthrough. Then, I went to sleep and waited for the goblins. Once they arrived, I began to make quick work of them using my new powerful gear that I had constructed from the space orb. With the goblins defeated, I knew that I could now find the goblin tinkerer underground. So using the hunter potions that I had gotten from fishing, I began to scour the caverns under my base for the goblin NPC. After a surprisingly long search, I finally managed to find the bound tinkerer and immediately purchased some useful items that he had to offer. With my equipment upgrades now taken care of, I just had one final task that I wanted to complete before fighting Skeletontron, and that was the construction, or I guess I should say excavation, of a elevator. I hoped that in the process I'd be able to find some more life crystals to top off my max HP, but unfortunately this didn't happen. However, I decided to proceed with the next boss fight anyways. Once I arrived at the dungeon, I waited a bit for for nightfall, and then I spoke to the old man, releasing his curse. With the angry skeleton chasing after me, I began to target his bony hands, hoping to take them out as soon as possible. Using the arena that I had set up earlier, dodging his hands was pretty straightforward, and before long, I had managed to destroy them, prompting Skeletontron to deploy his magical cursed skulls as a final defense measure. Unfortunately for Skeletontron though, I had access to the ever-powerful circling method, allowing me to maneuver around the boss, dodging all of his attacks. Up against this tried-and-true strategy, Skeletontron stood no chance, and before long, he was defeated. With the removal of Skeletontron, I was now able to enter the dungeon, but because I wouldn't be able to loot any of the chests, I decided that for now at least, it wouldn't really be worth it to venture down there. Instead, I made my way to the underworld and began clearing a path for the upcoming fight with Wall of Flesh. Once I felt ready, I traveled to the edge of the world and plunged a voodoo doll into lava, summoning my final foe to face me. As the wall began his endless approach, I used my space gun to start taking out his hungry guardians. Thanks to the piercing capabilities of my space gun, on top of taking out the hungries, I was also able to do damage to the boss itself, slowly progressing the fight towards its conclusion. As the wall's health dropped even further, his attacks began ramping up in intensity with more frequent lasers and a faster approach. Weaving my way through the labyrinth of buildings, I continued to fire my endless stream of lasers at the wall, hoping that it would be enough to defeat him. As the battle approached its culmination, the wall's speed grew to alarming rates, but just as I thought he might catch me, a final laser pierced through his defenses and struck down the wall. Satisfied with my progress, I collected my loot, knowing that although I had won today, the second half of the challenge was still ahead of me. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to be notified when I upload part 2 in the future, and if you'd like to see live content, I have a Twitch channel. There will be a link in the description if you're interested. But with that out of the way, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to Beav Notice Me Senpai and all my other patrons for helping make this video possible.